you're looking at 2 to 4 trillion in unfunded liabilities. So it's a huge debt.
Hi, I'm Nick Gillespie with Reason TV, and today we're talking with Adrian Moore. He's the Vice President for Policy Research at Reason Foundation. Thanks for talking to us.
Thanks, Nick.
We want to talk about pension problems, public sector pension problems. Give it to us straight. How big is the public sector pension problem in America?
The most optimistic scenario is it's $1 trillion in unfunded liabilities.
Okay, and so that means that these are payments that are owed at some point in the future,
yes,
and there's just no money in the bank for them.
So there's promises made to pay pensions in the future for current state workers, and we're $1 trillion short of what should be in the bank to pay for that.
And this is state and local municipal
this is
workers.
all state and local. Now that's the optimistic scenario, assuming that all of the investments in those pension funds are going to make 7% or more every year for the next 50 years. Much more realistic scenario that they might make like 4 or 5%. You're looking at 2 to 4 trillion in unfunded liabilities. So it's a huge debt.
Give an example of, or a couple of examples of what's a state that has gotten into really big trouble with this, and how did they get there?
Probably most notorious one right now is New Jersey. It's been in the news a lot because Christie went into office promising to start paying the debt and has then not been willing to make the cuts elsewhere in the budget to make the payments, and so he's reneged on that promise essentially. And they are not only deeply in debt, but each year they are not making the minimum payment they need to make in order to keep from going deeper in debt. So they're doubling down on their problem.
And this is just in the public sector pension.
This is just government worker pensions.
Yeah, they're not making the payments each year that they're supposed to be making, so that money gets vested and then grows over time. And each year they don't do that, then they get further and further behind.
Every year a percentage of salary needs to be invested so that it can grow and pay for the pension benefits after folks retire. So there's a calculation process for figuring out how much each state or local government needs to put aside each year. And so places like New Jersey that are not putting that money aside are essentially saying, well, we'll have to make up for that in the future without the interest earnings or the investment earnings. So it's going to be it's a compounding debt.
Right. Talk about some cities. We hear a lot about municipalities or at the city level that go bankrupt because of pension obligations or liabilities. What's an example of that?
You've got San Bernardino in California, Vallejo in California that went through bankruptcy, Stockton in California.
So what is the level of of obligation that they owe that's not getting paid?
Think of it this way. If you go back to around 2000, a typical city, county, or state in the United States would be paying around 15, maybe 20% of its total payroll for pensions. Fast forward a decade later after they made all these unsustainable promises and failed to make payments, and you've got places where more than half of total payroll is going to pay for pensions. So what that means is if half the money you have to pay for people is going to pay for pensions, you can't hire anybody else. So you've got cities that are not opening new fire stations as new development occurs, not expanding the streets or the street maintenance as new development occurs, all kinds of cutbacks happening. And then you've got places like Stockton, San Bernardino, and Detroit that went bankrupt because so much money got siphoned off by things like pensions.
You hear a lot of these insane stories where people get to retire at young ages at exorbitant pensions. What's an example of that?
Yeah, there's really 3 kinds of problems that get you into pension trouble if you're a local or state government. One is you don't make your payments that you're supposed to make. 2 is you put the money in, but you assume a ridiculous rate of return on those investments that isn't realized.
This is something that California is famous for doing, right? Where they figure that they're going to get 8 or 10% or something a year, whereas 8%. They're more likely to get something in the 3 to 4 range.
And then when you miss those investment targets for a year, it actually compounds, so it's much harder to make up for it in the future. So you run up debts that way. And then the third way, which particularly California, Illinois, and New Jersey are notorious for, is ratcheting up the benefits. So allowing more people to retire younger, allowing them to retire with more of their pay. So you get people whose final year salary is double their base salary, and that counts for their pension.
How did we get here? Because this is, it seems insane that you would be, first off, the public sector pension issue is very different than private sector
Yeah.
pension. They tend to be much more generous and whatnot, but there aren't that many people in the public sector working. I mean, it's what, 10, 15% of the population. So how did we get to this?
Yeah, it's politics. It's easy to make promises that have to be paid for in the future. That's what it comes down to. Whether you're promising too high benefits or not making your payments, you're basically saying, someone in the future will get us out of this mess. I'm going to cash in now.
Talk about the reforms. What are the best ways to kind of address this, this imbalance, which is, really making economic growth sluggish. It's increasing taxes. It's screwing up all sorts of things.
Well, there's a lot of moving pieces in a pension system, so there are a lot of potential reforms. And kind of the biggest bottom line is meeting the obligations you've met. I mean, it doesn't matter so much what a city, county, or state promises, if they're putting the money aside to pay for it, they're at least not putting a debt on future generations.
You have some really interesting polling on, kind of attitudes towards public sector pensions, because this is, as more and more private sector workers start looking at this and they look at their 401k account and they're like, there's not that much in that, and I'm going to be working until I'm 70, and then my neighbor is retiring at 55 on, 80% of their income. What is the polling showing you?
Yeah, I mean,
attitudes towards this?
People really do see the unfairness of that. What polls show, first of all, is that this is a very, very popular idea. It's been put to the public vote about a half a dozen times, and in all but one of those cases, it passed overwhelmingly. And then we've done some sort of household polling that shows that the only households that oppose pension reform are those that have a government worker in the household. And even there, 40% of those households support pension reform. So it's very, very popular. It's just politicians getting the will to take on the organized interests of the unions that slows things down.
What what are the bright spots in at a state level? And you've talked a little bit about this, but you can maybe go into a little more detail of what are the bright spots on a state level and a local level of people who got pension reform correct?
Yeah, I think San Diego at the city level did some very comprehensive pension reforms that are turning out to be really successful. San Jose in California did very similar things.
So what did they do?
They put all new employees into a 401k style pension system. They changed the contribution requirements for existing employees, and they put things on a more sustainable base going forward.
If people want to learn more about Reason Foundation's efforts on pension reform, what's the best place to go?
Yeah, we have a huge project where we're taking a lot of people who have worked in those states and cities that did pension reform, the government officials there, and using them as mentors to help other cities and states who want to do pension reform. So kind of that peer-to-peer coaching. And you can learn all about that at reason.org/pension reform.
Thank you, Adrian Moore, Vice President of Policy and Research at Reason Foundation. For Reason TV, I'm Nick Gillespie.